I've spent months tracing the old traditions of Ireland back to Celtic Christianity and how the Indo-European pagan beliefs survived in its presence. Here, I present to you the story of the Celtic Christians. It all begins here. When you think Ireland, the Catholic religion seems to be what we are associated with mostly. We carry its traits, being closed off about sexual activity, and inherent guilt related to public displays of affection, even when just looking on. Christianity, with close inspection, obviously differs across denominational lines, but surely, let's say, Catholicism doesn't differ from country to country. Not Catholic Ireland and Spain, Catholic Italy, Argentina and Mexico all celebrate the same holidays, hold the same masses and worship the same God. They are Catholic, so surely they worship the same things. Reasonable assumption. Their Bibles and priests surely are the same. Their diocesan structure is the same. A Brazilian woman can walk into an Irish mass and feel familiarity. An Irish lad can walk into a Croatian mass. He may not understand the language, but he will at least feel at home. If an Irishman marries a Polish woman, their religious traditions are bound to seem very familiar. They would be blessed by the church and its local priest. If he, the Irishman, let's call him Paul, is a strict Catholic, the Polish woman, let's call her Carolina, will feel at home in his house and its decorum. She will see saints adored through the house, some very familiar, others a bit different. She sees St. Francis and a picture adorning St. John Paul II, a Polish pope loved by the Irish. She'll see constant veneration of the Virgin Mary throughout, in statues, in pictures. A few will catch her eye. St. Patrick, not worshipped by the Poles, but famous in popular culture, so she knows him. Then she'll come across one saint that seems to be adored by all, in a way she has never really seen. Her cross, like none she's seen. Her name, synonymous with a goddess of old. Her wells, places of pilgrimage by pagans of yore. Her name, Saint Brigidh. Carolina may brush it off as an odd aspect of Irish adoration, and at least familiarise herself with Brigidh. As the middle of summer approaches, Carolina will notice the news talking about the upcoming events at Newgrange, when the inner chamber of the passage tomb will be illuminated by the sun, and how the Irish beg the lotto picks them to attend this year's cosmic event. Strange, Carolina says to herself. People haven't worshipped the sun in millennia. Why is it still important? As she visits more of Ireland, she sees ancient megalith sites and mounds. As she learns, she realises some people gather at these mounds and sites on the same dates as the old pagan fire festivals. The Hill of Uisneach, she is told, considered the centre of Ireland, holds these events, the next one being Lunasa, the harvest festival. She is told by her colleague in work that some of these traditions, like Lunasa, still hold significance in rural parts of Ireland, where they have continued for thousands of years. She is surprised that Ireland still perpetuates these traditions. She knows of similar ones in rural Poland and Lithuania especially. Stuck in time, she thinks. She is also surprised to learn that her husband wasn't necessarily raised on stories of Abraham or David and Goliath or Cain and Abel outside of religious class in school, but instead he was raised on stories of Fionn McCool, of Na Fianna, of the Salmon of Knowledge, of Uiscín and Tir na nÓg. When Halloween comes around, she's very familiar due to American movies and films over the decades. But hark, she learns its Irish origins. She learns of the puka and his tricks or treats as he visits your home. She learns of the Celtic New Year and the veil between our world and the other world, creating a liminal space. Then, most surprising fact of all, she learns the monks of Ireland, of the monasteries, are the ones responsible for the continuation of the mythological traditions. They are the ones who wrote them down for all to continue. Besides the tales passed of local heritage and customs that parents and grandparents passed down, the work of the monks gave us a broader knowledge of the mythos that surrounds Ireland's ancient religion, skewed to fit Christian theology, but their work deeply respected by the Irish, she learns. Maybe the formal structure of Christianity in Ireland is that of the Catholic Church, but what if the synchronization between the pagan traditions and Christ was the real Christianity in Ireland all along? She asks herself. When it comes to people returning to the pre Christian spirituality of Ireland, many arrive at it from different angles. Some people approach it from an anti Christian perspective. They were raised strict Christians, so rebel against it. Others explore Eastern mysticism and thus are instructed to return to nature and ultimately their own ancestors. Some may find it by using popular psychedelics like DMT or magic mushrooms. Many treat it as escapism and utilize their imaginations with fantasy dress. This has led many modern pagan circles to have conflicting ideologies, to be splintered and lacking anything cohesive. Politics differ widely. You'll find boomer and English rich kid hippies, lads dressed as Gandalf and Legolas, psycho astronauts from all walks of life, and finally, tarot reading self-professed yogi girls who lived in Bali for a while. Nothing is inherently wrong with any of that, but ultimately detracts from the legitimacy of any pagan movement and riddles it with globalized New Age philosophies. As Celtic is used by anyone or everyone, I will focus on aspects of Christianity in Ireland that have clearly definable pre-Christian Celtic roots. When Christianity arrived in Ireland, it didn't come as a clean slate. It came with saints and stories, yes, but it also came to people who already had rituals, rhythms, and divine connection with the land. And rather than wiping all of that away, early Irish Christianity seems to have done something far more interesting. Instead of fracturing, it embedded the new faith into the old ways. One of the most vivid examples of this is the Eucharist. In much of the Roman world, the Eucharist was seen as a memorial of Christ's sacrifice, a solemn atonement for sin. But in early Irish texts, like the monastery of Tallagh's Spo Missal, we find something different. The Eucharist is described as refreshment, something that heals, strengthens, and renews the believer. Not punishment or guilt, but nourishment. And this language wasn't accidental. It echoes the deep Celtic tradition of sacred feasting, where gathering to eat and drink wasn't just about survival, it was a spiritual act. Meals were shared in honour of ancestors, the changing seasons, and the gods of the land. So, when Christianity introduced a sacred meal centered around Christ, mimicking the Last Supper, it didn't feel foreign. It felt familiar, like the old ritual, but transformed. Regarding these monastic texts of Tallaght, Thomas O'Loughlin mentions in his book Celtic Theology, the common theme running through these texts is that of the communion with one another, communion with the first Christian meals, communion with the whole church on earth and in heaven, communion with Christ, and the final future communion of the whole Christ. It imitates a passage out of Marcus Aurelius, a Roman pagan's book, Meditations. He writes, "Remember that you are part of a whole, a function of nature, like the clouds, the trees, the birds. You are not separate from it, but a part of its ongoing process. The whole being the fact that everyone is everything, and everything is everyone." Another powerful example is the use of litanies, long rhythmic prayers calling on saints and angels for help and protection. In Ireland, these prayers weren't just spoken inside churches. They were often prayed on the move, walking in processions, circling holy sites, tracing the contours of sacred land. This practice of ritual movement through landscape mirrors older Celtic customs, like a walking sunwise around wells, hills, or graves to invoke blessing and protection. In both pagan and Christian practice, the land itself was not neutral, it was alive, charged with spiritual meaning. In these litanies, we see Christianity not erasing old sacred geographies, but baptizing them, turning the familiar pathways of pagan Ireland into new journeys of Christian prayer. Some scholars argue that St. Brigidh of Kildare's monastery, for example, was built upon a Druidist temple. Then there's St. Patrick, often credited with converting the Irish, but rarely appreciated as a vessel of the word he really was. Patrick didn't bring a docile version of Roman Christianity. He spoke in visions and battles, in demons and light, imagery that deeply resonated with the mythic, heroic worldview of the Irish. Later, scholars like Morocco in the 7th century book Vita Sancti Patrici portrayed Patrick almost like a knight for Christ, confronting dark forces, lighting sacred fires, and performing miracles that echoed the mystic feats of Celtic heroes like Cuchulainn. Even sin and penance, the moral heart of Christian life, took on a uniquely Irish tone. The penitentials, early Irish confession manuals, treated sin like a relational imbalance, something that could be healed through specific actions. This wasn't so far removed from the Brehon Eric's law, where social wrongs were resolved by compensation and restoring harmony, not abstract guilt. The moral code of Christianity didn't really clash with Celtic law, it merged with it. Thomas O'Loughlin writes, Old Irish law is a third factor in the development of the penitentials. It does appear that central native features like crimes, from the smallest trespass of an animal to homicide, can be punished by payment of fine between the two parties involved. And throughout it all, the daily rhythms of monastic prayer were set not by clock or calendar alone, but by natural time. Sunrise, moonrise, the seasons turning. The cycles of prayer in early Irish monasticism echoed the old Celtic calendar. Times marked by light and dark, harvest and hunger, festival and stillness. Christianity sanctified the day, but it was still the old day, just seen through new eyes. These are ways within the formality of Christian theology and practice allowed a Celtic seed to sprout within a Roman structure. Upon the arrival of Christianity to Irish shores in the 5th century, they set out to discredit the perennial belief in the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Irish pantheons of gods and goddesses, by reshaping their lineage as legend and myth as opposed to powerful, divine, real gods and goddesses. Since it is easier to kill a hero than a god, the Christians, though not without a trace of regret, for it is said that St. Patrick himself had a fondness for the tales of the Sidhe, eventually declared that the Tuatha Dé Danann, though powerful and long-lived, were, in the end, no more than shadows of the past. The gods were the Tuatha Dé Danann, a magnificent tribe of supernatural beings that were replaced during the invasion of Ireland by a race called the Milesians, who themselves were mythic beings that came from the other world, sending the gods to become the Sidhe of the mountains, or the Fairies of the hills. Sidhe, Sidhe, Fairies, all referring to the same thing. When the monks recorded these oral traditions, they tended to Christianize them. Instead of the Sidhe being mighty gods of the Indo-European tradition, they were fallen angels who were indecisive in their decision to support either God or Lucifer in the great revolt of heaven, so were banished, destined to fall to hell. But as Archangel Michael looked around heaven, he saw the place being empty and pleaded with God to have mercy on these angels. So God shut the opening that was casting them down and closed over hell. The fairies that were stuck in limbo, some in the sea, some in the sky, some in the ground, became the sky fairies, the sea fairies, and the Sidhe of the mountains. This was a case of clear Christianization of the ancient pagan tradition. It was not discarded, but instead presented in a way that fits Christian theology. As Caroline White notes in her book, A History of the Fairies, according to the adherents of the fallen angel story, fairies are, by nature, indiscriminate in their favours and lacking all moral proportion, sometimes helping and sometimes hindering humankind. Fairy activities, never genuinely evil, are dismissed as capricious whims or morally deficient creatures. Necessarily, Christianity has a vested interest in this fallen angel view. The fairies evolved to have their own localized power dynamics with pastoral authorities. It is said the God of the Christians is one they were hesitant around the most, with people able to protect themselves from fairy mischief with a God bless you or blessing yourself thrice. An unbaptized child would be in harm's way of the fairies. Surely there are fewer mortals amongst the fairies since the arrival of Christ. Yet it's not fear, but respect that drove their cautiousness around the mention of Christ. The fairies have no thirst of universalism amongst their palates. They wish not to contest with the Almighty for attention or divinity. They exist, regardless of belief in them or not, and they know it. They seek not theological superiority or divine honours. The fairies leave what is God's unto God, and theirs unto theirs. God of the Bible and the gods of Era exist in symbiosis. Although many a priest of Ireland, through vocational responsibilities, declared the fairies to have no soul, they do it with sadness as opposed to delight. So the legend goes, Father O'Flynn himself lived with the Sidhe in the land of eternal youth for 101 years, and upon return to our realm was made a priest on the spot, for the perennial wisdom he had gained made him a holy man. As Christianity spread into Ireland, Druids, being the representatives of the native pagan religion, were slowly pushed out into darkness. Alongside them existed the bards as singers of praise poetry, and the Filidh as possible a subdivision of the Druids. The Filidh took the leading role upon the incremental removal of the Druids, and eventually expanded that role to the bardic poetry, becoming the sole authority. In his book Celtic Mythology, Prunchas McKenna, a Celtic scholar out of University College Dublin, writes, the Filidh succeeded in establishing a remarkable compromise with the ecclesiastical authorities of Christianity, which allowed the two bodies separate but complementary spheres of authority, and permitted the Filidh to continue many of their ancient functions and prerogatives, including some which had formerly belonged to the Druids. In his book Literary History of Ireland, linguist and former President of Ireland, Dr. Douglas Hyde, lays out how alongside monastic schools existed the ancient bardic or Filidh institutions. They were almost certainly a continuation of the ancient Druidic schools, as aforementioned. Dr. Hyde argues that the bardic schools were really a continuation of the Druidic schools and embodied much that was purely pagan in their curriculum. Instances that I've mentioned, occurring in the Book of Poets' Instruction, are evidently remains of magic incantations and terrifying magic ceremonies, taken over from the schools and times of the Druids and carried on into the Christian era. We see millennia-old continuation, as Edward Campion, a Jesuit priest, recorded in his History of Ireland in 1571, that they speak Latin with a vulgar tongue common in their schools of leechcraft and law, and that they stay in them up to 16 to 20 years. The core of the Christian tradition centered around the idea of a triune God, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, existing in a co-eternal and consubstantial state, was something completely understandable to the pagan worldview across Europe. In both Ireland and Wales, the triad was a popular method for summarizing and preserving traditional knowledge, and extensive collections of triadic sayings can be found in the literature of both regions. Scholars have noted that the use of three can serve to intensify meaning and may also represent a sense of completeness or totality. One or both of these functions may have been at play in the Celtic use of triads. Among the spiritual elite of the Celts, the system forms into a striking threefold division: Druids, Filidh, and Bards, each distinct yet united in function. Foremost amongst the fierce war goddesses of Ireland stands a formidable triad who lay special claim to that title: the Morrigan, Bev, and Niven. They are more often understood as a collective, a trio embodying a single divine force in three aspects. Their frequent conflation in myth suggests not separate identities, but a threefold manifestation of one war goddess. This interpretation is reinforced by occasional references to the Three Morrigans, confirming the triadic nature of this powerful deity. Similarly, the land itself is personified by a triple goddess in the figures of Eru, Banba, and Foila, who collectively embody the sovereignty of Ireland. Oisin, son of Finn, went to the land of Tir na Nog. What felt like a short time was 300 days. The Connacht warrior Nera entered the mound of the Fairies for 3 days and 3 nights, only to find a few minutes has passed. Saint Brigidh and Saint Patrick met on a hill and talked for 3 days and 3 nights, only to find an hour had passed. Georges Dumézil, a French philologist and comparative mythologist, proposed that all Indo-European societies shared an ideological structure in 3 core functions: warfare, sovereignty, and fertility. This trifunctional hypothesis reveals itself in myths, rituals, and social orders across culture, from India to Rome to Ireland. In the Celtic world, this pattern is evident in the roles of kingship, the divine order, and even societal classes. Far from being random, the recurring Celtic triads reflect a deeply ingrained framework that made the later Christian concept of a triune God both familiar and culturally resonant. When it comes to a clear example of synchronization, there is none more striking of that of Saint Brigidh of Kildare, who has an acquaintance in the ancient Celtic goddess Brigid. In the Irish tradition, Brigid, according to the 10th century Cormac's Glossary, was an expert in Filidh, that is, poetry, traditional learning, divination, and prophecy, and was revered by the aforementioned Filidh, the subdivision of the Druids. The same source identifies her as the daughter of the mighty Celtic god Deabha, and sister to 2 other figures also named Brigid, one associated with healing and the other with smithcraft. In terms of her role, Brigid was thus patroness of poetry and learning, healing, and craftsmanship. Such was her stature that her very name became synonymous with goddess. The life of the saint suggests a strong link to livestock and the bounty of the earth. Fittingly, her feast day, February the 1st, coincides with Imbolc, the pagan festival of spring, and remains marked by various popular, clearly pre-Christian customs. She is said to have been born at sunrise, neither indoors nor outdoors, nourished by the milk of a white, red-haired, supernatural cow, to have hung her wet cloak on a sunbeam, and to have stayed in a house that appeared to be engulfed in flames to onlookers. Gerald of Wales recounts that she and 19 nuns tended a sacred, ever-burning fire, encircled by a hedge no man could ever cross. In this, Brigid aligns with the Gaulish goddess Minerva, whose British sanctuary, according to the 3rd century writer Solanus, also contained a perpetual flame. It seems clear that no firm line can be drawn between the goddess Brigid and the saint, and it is likely that her great monastery of Kildare was once a pagan sanctuary, as mentioned. Though not a missionary or traveller, Brigid ranked second only to Patrick in Irish devotion, with dedications to her found across Irish territories, strongly suggesting that her widespread cult contained that of the older goddess. The name Brigid, originally an epithet meaning the exalted one, like the Vedic Sanskrit Prahati, reinforces Cormac's note that among all the Irish, a goddess used to be called Brigid. The title parallels with the British Brigantia, patron goddess of the Brigantes tribe, likely named after her, indicating continental roots. Like other Celtic goddesses such as Boan and Matrona, Brigid also lends her name to rivers, the Brent in Wales and the Brent in England. In her 2007 paper on Brigid, Professor Caroline Cusack states, "The goddess was retained in a Christian form. This was a lengthy and complicated transformation, which took place over several centuries. During those centuries, Christianity was becoming enmeshed in the fabric of Irish society. Older models of conversion, positing erasure of the old religion, and an uncomplicated acceptance of the new are simply not credible. So, although a separate Celtic Church is unlikely, the creative soul of the Celtic people adapted aspects of their pre-Christian culture into foundational Christian ceremonies, like the Eucharist procession, that added to the shaping of Western Christianity. Beyond the formal structure of the Church, the people of the land continued the wisdom of their ancestors, right up until modern day. We can still see bards roaming and people continuing to respect the Fairies of the hills on camera and even on YouTube. In the end, the Celtic aspects of Christianity was simply a reforging of Irish identity in the face of a new world order.